Welcome to the Church Solutions Podcast, brought to you by JSL Solutions. The Church Solutions Podcast is designed to help equip you and your church in the use of technology and other tools and services. And now, here are your hosts, Steve Lacey and Phil Thompson.
Hey folks, and welcome to another edition of the Church Solutions Podcast.
Hi, I'm Steve Lacey.
And my name is Phil Thompson. We welcome you to our weekly podcast. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. Our podcast is produced by JSL Solutions. We are a tech company. And what do we do here, Steve? Do you know?
We provide several products for the churches, all ministry related. We provide the streamingchurch.tv streaming platform, the Church App Live, which is mobile apps for churches, as well as myfluck.com, which has a web management as well as a church management system built in.
And we talk about on this podcast tech-related things, but not always tech-related things, because Steve and I, as well as others involved in our company, are very much involved in our local churches and very much seasoned and actually involved in leadership for many years. And I have a pastoral background, and Steve, you have all sorts of church ministry stuff backgrounds. And so we talk about a lot of different subjects. So thanks for being here with us. And today we're going to talk about a subject we've titled this Fighting Back from Failure.
Right.
And there is a tech part of this that we will mention. There is a little bit of a tech piece that falls into this topic.
There's actually, last week we talked about leadership. So there's an element of this that ties into that leadership piece as well.
It really does. And we have a heart for people. We have a heart for pastors. We have a heart for people involved in church work, volunteer work. And so that's why we cover a lot of these different topics. But failure is something we all experience to some degree, right? I mean, I've made mistakes. I've blown it in things. I've failed in some financial endeavors. I've failed in I don't know if I really failed technically in a business endeavor, but when it comes to ministry, I don't think I've really ever failed permanently, but I've had setbacks.
Right.
And so.
The tie-in to the leadership piece of this is if you haven't failed, from in a leadership perspective, that means you're really not pushing the envelope. Yeah. You're playing it, you're back and you're playing it safe. You're not extending you're not extending yourself to your full potential, because you will experience some failure, and failure is a healthy thing that's going to happen. And it's really a matter of how you treat the failure. That's right.
I can remember, speaking of failures, I remember I was the executive pastor actually at your church at one point, many, many years ago. And I remember our senior pastor said, I want this staff to be able to take risks, and let's go forward, and let's not play it safe. And I expect one decent failure from you a week. And so the next week I came to his office. I said, Jeff, I just made a little mistake in the accounting. We have a $5,000 failure. So he got what he wanted. And I kept my job too, believe it or not.
Well, accounting's not an area you're going to want to do too much failing in.
Yeah, that can come back to bite you. So, we're joking around this, but again, failure can come from all sorts of degrees. So if you're listening to this, it could be some minor things, it could be some major things. Some people, when they think of ministers that have failures, a lot of stuff that pops into your mind is moral failures, and we can cover that a little bit. But there's other kinds of failures as well. So why don't we just jump into it? Let's give you five steps that can help you get some successful restoration, so to speak.
Right, or how to use failure to your benefit.
Exactly. That's a good title. Maybe we should use that as the title for this podcast. So what's the first thing that we should consider if you've goofed up somehow?
So the first thing is to basically get some rest or take a break, step away for a little while.
Get some rest. You know what? This is something a lot of people don't consider, but it's really important for you to really consider this, because in nearly every failure situation I've seen or been in, the person who falls or who has a mistake or has some kind of a failure, you get worn out of it. You just get worn out. You get exhausted emotionally,
right,
as well as physically.
Right. So you need some time to kind of step away and recover from what's been going on.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, and it could be short-term rest. It could be just as simple as, maybe depending again on the extent of your failure, it could maybe just be a week, or it could be longer. It just depends again on what kind of the situation it is. But when you have a setback, sometimes I think it's Rick Warren who says sometimes if you're having a rough day, sometimes the best course of action is to go take a nap, and there's really some truth to that. So again, depending on what kind of a setback you've had, you might want to take some rest that's long term. I remember when I was a senior pastor, we'd actually had a church split. And I'm not sure I wasn't really responsible for the church split, but it drained me emotionally and physically. And one of the advice I got from one of my pastoral friends, who was kind of one of my counselors, who mentors, said, you know what, you need to take a sabbatical, take a year off, I think is what he initially said. I didn't do it. I should have at least taken some kind of a sabbatical. So getting rest really does make a difference in how you perceive things, how you feel, and getting back on track.
All right, exactly.
So what's the next step? So that's the first step when it comes to...
get some rest or take a break or kind of step away from the situation for a little while.
Exactly, yeah.
Gather your thoughts.
Yeah.
So the next would be to give up the victim card.
It is easy, especially if you're involved in ministry and you have so many people involved in what you're doing, because ministry is all about people. I mean, anything in life is, business or ministry. But it's very easy sometimes to, there's other people involved in sometimes in the mistake. You may not be the only person that goofed up on something. And so it's easy to say, well, you know what, it's her fault, or it's really their fault. I have very little to play in this issue.
Right.
So, you kind of want to push it off, the old joke about, it's Adam and Eve, they're the ones that goofed everything up.
Yeah, this kind of ties into, you could equally say, don't play the blame game with this. Right. You don't want to blame other people, and you don't want to play the victim card as well, like, oh my, all is lost.
Right.
It's all because I am incompetent or whatever, that sort of thing.
Yeah, or they treated, again, if you're in ministry and maybe some members of your congregation have, dumped on you or blamed you for things, or they actually had a big part in the problem, it's easy to say, well, I was a victim in this situation, And as you said, the blame thing is easy to do too. So really, again, we're talking about how you can kind of get out of failure mode, how you can get restoration, how you can move forward. The best thing to do is take responsibility for what you're responsible for.
Right.
We're not saying you take responsibility for everybody else's mistakes. We're not saying that. We're saying, though, that for what you're part of the issue, take full responsibility for your part of the problem.
And this ties into, this is a leadership principle as well. If you're the leader of a church and something doesn't go the way you anticipated, you need to step up and say, no, it wasn't my children's pastor that failed in this arena. I failed because I didn't equip the children's pastor. Whatever the situation would be, you're ultimately responsible for the failure through your leadership, either something you did do and didn't do.
Right.
So
yeah, that's part of taking responsibility. Now, you don't have to linger in that forever, but you definitely got to take responsibility for it and move on for it. So as we continue on here in some helpful steps for you, hopefully this will help you. Maybe you can share it with somebody else as well. The bottom line is as you move forward here, you really need the third point would be, why did this happen? Find out why this mistake, this failure, this whatever it might have been, whatever situation it was that caused you to goof up or to fail, find out why it happened.
Yeah, and so what you basically would want to do is rewind the clock and see evaluate what went in and then what actions you could have taken differently to avoid that. Because the whole goal of this thing is you want to go through these failures and learn from them so that you don't do them again. Yeah. So the number one thing would be to find out exactly why it happened and look at the scenario and try to identify the things that you possibly could have done differently or gotten involved differently to prevent that from happening in the future.
And that could take could probably involve having some trusted people in your life that you can share some things with. Because sometimes we have what I call myopia. We're nearsighted sometimes when we have issues and problems. We don't necessarily see the full picture. And it's sometimes very difficult to do that. But again, if you can bring in some trusted people that you're friends with, somebody that's going to be honest with you, not somebody that's necessarily going to side with you on everything, but somebody can get an unbiased feedback, unbiased perspective on that situation. So what happened here? Why did I goof up? What went wrong here? And really kind of take a look at it with some help and decide, okay, the old saying is it's always good to learn from your mistakes, and that's important, but it's also good to learn from other people's mistakes too. So if you can get some help from some other people that maybe have gone down the same path you have and have run across the same problems or same obstacles, that's so helpful. Because again, it's just easy sometimes when you're caught up in something to just not see
the
full
whole picture,
the whole thing. And so by getting a little bit of the find out how it happened or why it happened, it's real important. And as you said, Steve, you just, you don't want to see the whole thing happen again, depending on what it is. It could be just something minor, but you keep making the same goofy mistakes, you're not going to go forward in your life or your ministry or whatever it might be.
Right.
So
exactly.
All right, so here's the next point is, and this is an article. Actually, we've taken some of this stuff from an article here, a ministry. I think it's Vanderbloemen, I think is how you pronounce his name. It's a ministry that really works with other churches, and so we're taking some of these tips from another writer here. But I think it's very important, and that is the next step is building a firewall. And we're not talking necessarily about a tech-related thing, although we're going to bring in some tech software into this, but building a firewall. Can you explain a little bit about what that means?
I think the point behind this is you want to ensure that this won't happen again. This kind of ties into
point.
The point we made previously is if you can identify what the issue was, and then you can set up some things, reminders, some things to consider as you move forward to avoid a similar result that you have here. So you basically want to put some things in place that will prevent the mistake or the failure from happening again.
And that involves also, again, relationships. And if you're out there, if you're a leader, a pastor, a volunteer, and you don't really have at least a couple people in your life that you can bounce things off of and have a relationship with, you're really missing out. You're missing out. You're missing out on the benefit of having some friends. I don't know exactly how to tell you how to get that in a hurry. It takes time to build relationships. It takes time to make friends that you can trust. And I've been involved in ministry for a long time on the pastoral end, so I know it's not easy. You're out there, you're trying to work with a church, and you can't just share your life with anybody, because it can come back to haunt you. I mean, even if you got your control in areas of your life, if you share weaknesses with people, sometimes it can come back to bite you.
Right. It depends on the relationship you have with the person. And
right.
Yeah, definitely you want to extend your private self to the point where you can trust the other person. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what I'm getting at is what we're saying here when we say build a firewall, so that this won't happen again. We're also saying that's not always easy, because you have to do it with the relationships for the most part, and find out, okay, how can we prevent whatever the situation is from coming up again? So when we talk about failure, again, there's all sorts of things that come to mind. It could be financial failure in your life. It could be an area of ministry that it didn't work out right. You hired somebody that didn't work out, and you had to fire them. And as you said earlier, the big part of that is also your responsibility, and not always. I mean, sometimes you hire people and they do things that are just totally unexpected. But sometimes, I've worked with some churches where they would bring people on staff, and they just didn't really vet them very well. They just didn't know what they were getting. They didn't really analyze their weaknesses or their strengths, and we get somebody that doesn't do well. Well, honestly, it may not be their fault. We put them in a situation where we didn't help them or maybe that wasn't even a good fit. Right. So I'm getting a little bit off track here, but
what you're getting at here is you want to be able to set up. So you've identified an area where maybe you're not strong in that's caused the failure, and you want to set up an accountability partner that that would go beyond just yourself to say, hey, I have a tendency towards X. Could you be my accountability partner and kind of keep me in line with that?
Yeah.
So one of the, I guess there's tying into the tech related element of that. I actually have a very good friend of mine from high school that he's not a full-time, I guess everyone is a full-time minister, but he's not a full-time minister with the church. But he has a ministry that is actually, we're hosting on our servers now, called Pure for a Purpose.
Pure for a Purpose.
Pure for a Purpose, and it is related to porn.
Wow.
It's or porn addiction.
Okay.
And so he has a real heart for reaching out with men. It's kind of the unspoken thing that people don't, a lot of guys don't talk about or admit to, but a lot of people have issues with porn. So there's been some tech solutions in that arena that have to do with setting up, such as accountability partners and that sort of thing.
Yeah, Covenant Eyes is one of those tech related things we're talking about here. Covenant Eyes, it's not free, but for a price you can set things up where I believe what it does is it will, if you have an accountability partner, I'm not sure they will provide one. Maybe they will, but like if you have a friend of yours that you can trust and you let's say you have an issue with pornography, you can make them a part of this Covenant Eyes program. And so when you're surfing the web, and you happen to pop in one of these X-rated sites, it will send your accountability partner a notice and saying, I don't even know what it says. I've never used it. I know when I was in ministry at a church, we talked about using it with one person, and we just never did. But it will help the other person keep you accountable. Right, exactly. And you can be your wife or your spouse or whatever. It could be anybody you choose. But Covenant Eyes is something you might want to consider if you're having an issue. And so when we talk about, we're talking about these things here, how to really go forward, get some rest, give up the blame game, find out why it happened, and then build a firewall. That's in some ways, it's not really a firewall, but it will certainly give you some accountability, which I think can be helpful at times. Yeah. So, absolutely. All right, so moving on here as we talk about pushing through failure. You had a good title for this. What was your title again? I called it Fighting Back from Failure, but you called it something else.
Learning from your mistakes. I can't remember what I said.
We'll go back and listen to the podcast. But so as we move forward here with this thing, because this is an issue, we all deal with it, just having to go forward in life and go past our mistakes. So the fifth one and the final one is keep moving forward. Keep moving forward. When you're going through a rough time, it's very easy sometimes to just give up. I think it was Winston Churchill who said, if you're going through hell right now, keep moving. and it's really true. I mean, if you're having a difficult time right now, especially if you've made some mistakes, it's a dark time in your life right now, you really sometimes just need to push through as best you can. Right. There is a thing we believe very strongly in grace, in God's grace, and so there is a grace I think that's accessible for us. People, we need grace from each other, we need grace from God, and sometimes surviving failure, it does take a lot of prayer, it takes a lot of mental discipline, it does take time. And this, going along with the idea of the accountability partner, having some close friends that are going to encourage you and get you moving. Once you've had your initial rest and break, and it's time to get back in there, having some friends around you to encourage you and make sure that you keep moving, and you don't wallow in your in the failure, is an important thing. Absolutely. And again, there's grace available. I think sometimes it's easy if you're getting down, if you've made a major mistake, especially a major failure, it's easy to get down on yourself, to get depressed. And we understand that. I've had to deal with depression in the past, and I understand sometimes you just feel like you can't keep moving. And so having some friends helps. But also, again, keep in mind, at least from my theological viewpoint, God's grace is bigger than your failure. God's grace can help you go through and push through and help you. Now, it may mean you may need to make some changes. It might mean a new career, maybe. Might mean a new role in your church, depending on what you do there as a volunteer or a member. If you're a pastor, it could mean a new church down the road a ways. I don't know. It's all depends. But no matter what happens, healthy recovery many times means a change.
Right.
Well, it certainly means a new future. And so failure does hurt. I mean, we're not minimizing that at all here today. And the truth is, though, that, as you said at the very beginning of this podcast, failure happens. And if you haven't had a failure yet, chances are you're going to have one to some degree. It may not be major, it may be small, but it's just part of life. We're humans. Right. We make mistakes.
So turn them into a learning opportunity. Mm-hmm. And, it's just, as you mentioned, it's part of life. Learn from it, take the good from it, and move forward a much better person and leader in your ministry.
Absolutely. And that's the good thing about what we do and what we believe. And I think most of our people listening probably believe the same thing, that we serve a God of forgiveness, a God of grace. And so that grace and that forgiveness is available. And, if we can help you with this issue, we're pretty seasoned with some of this stuff. We certainly know some people that could help you as well. Please don't hesitate to send us an email. You can just send it to support@streamingchurch.tv. And we will contact you and help you if we can, any way we can. Support@streamingchurch.tv. And because we're all about this company, JSL Solutions. We're a tech related company, but we're all about helping to see churches and pastors and ministry people succeed. We want you to go forward in life.
Right, exactly.
And it's I was thinking about this the other day. Doing ministry stuff is a tough job. A lot of people think, you only work 1 or 2 days a week, if you're a pastor. And the truth is, if you really care about what you do as a pastor, it's a tough deal because you're involved in it. You're sold out. You're passionate about your church, about your ministry. Even if you're not a full-time pastor, you've probably got some passion for an area of ministry, and it's emotionally draining. It can be physically draining, and it just builds up. And you talk about spiritual warfare and everything else involved, that it can add up.
Right, exactly.
It's a tough deal. So we understand that. So if we can help you in any way, we certainly want to do that. That's our heart here. And please get a hold of us if we can help you. So anything else to add on this topic, Steve?
I think we've got it.
All right. Well, we'll continue these weekly podcasts, and check us out on iTunes. We've got this thing published everywhere. We're actually on YouTube, the audio portion. We got a blog, newmediaministries.tv, where we normally will post our little newsletter, and we'll have a link to this audio. We're also on iTunes, and iTunes you can give us a review, right?
Exactly. Yeah, give us a rating, give us a review.
All right, so it's Church Solutions Podcast on iTunes. We'd love to hear from you on that. And if you have a suggestion for a topic, maybe a little more along these lines, or maybe you've got something we haven't covered so far that's tech related, we'd love to hear from you, and we can certainly bounce some things off. We just had a potential customer today. We were talking with some new ideas and some creative things. And so if you've got some thoughts towards tech or ministry stuff in general, we'd love to hear from you. Support@streamingchurch.tv. Well, that about wraps it up for today. Steve, thanks so much for being a part of this.
That's great. Enjoy being here.
All right. Well, I do too. And thank you, folks, for listening. And catch us next time for another edition of the Church Solutions Podcast. I'm Phil Thompson. He's Steve Lacey. We will catch you next time. Have a great day.